season of the year, but it's tradition, and it's the clock is ticking, and we've been saying throughout board meetings throughout the fall, the major presentations that we've made to the board and the discussions we've had have provided information that we believe will inform our budget. Some of the presentations, you may recall, included presentations on enrollment projections, class size reports, assessment, how students are, how we're assessing our students' learning, technology. We had a terrific report from Matt the other night on technology and facilities. So we were kind of building through these presentations background information. The objectives for this workshop this afternoon are, first off, to provide a big picture. This is a draft. It's the first time the board will see what the administration has been working on now for several months, but we hope to try to provide a big picture overview of budget and budget issues at this time. We'd also, a second objective is to really identify some of the building blocks that are for the budget, and specifically some of the variables that represent some of our costs that are somewhat predetermined by contractual arrangements. So it's important for the board to see and get a handle on what our costs are rolling into 2014-15, bless you, before we start looking at program or staffing. A third, or refurbishment needs. A third objective that we have for today is to talk a little bit about, you'll see on the super graphic, to kind of continue the conversation we began with Ken's presentation on facilities at our last board meeting. Another objective is to kind of review again some of the major budget drivers, and probably most importantly is to determine any additional information that you as a board need to have, and what questions we need to research for you, what information we can develop or give you access to that will help you. Finally, one of the hopes that we have for today is to get some direction. In some years, the board has said, we think this is a good starting point. Go forward with your work, which, as you know, leads up to the superintendent's public hearing on the budget on January 23rd, where we have a chance to hear from the public about what their thoughts are about the budget. Based on the feedback from that meeting, the board then is faced with, in early February, with a decision on which budget will become the board's budget. So today is very important for us to share with you and have conversation with you about the aspects of the budget development and the issues that we faced in developing this budget, and then hopefully to seek some direction. Like I said, started to say, some years the board has said that's fine, other years the board has said go back and sharpen your pencil. And as always, I think we've tried to keep it at a policy level, that there are areas so that we're not getting down into the weeds of take $10 out of this pot and put it there, and we've never done that, and I think it's not productive. So sometimes the board has said, you know, this is a budget we think we need to go back and do more work on. So that's basically what we have. I'd like to turn it over in terms of our development work. In addition to the presentations we gave, one of the things that we did is we spent during the first week of this month meeting. The principals have been working, and Ann and directors working on their parts of the budget throughout October and November. And then in the first week in December, we had intensive meetings with each of these people. The cabinet met with them, and we went and thrashed around on every budget proposal. There was changes made as a result of those conversations. So we have, even though we felt there were some very legitimate proposals, we scaled them back and asked the principals to scale them back, and we that led us to what you're going to hear today. Another point that I wanted to emphasize with you before we begin is that we really, as a leadership team, looked at the budget proposals in light of trying to follow the board's approved assumptions for the budget. The strategic plan is also in our thinking, and also the emerging needs of the district. So those were some of the things we looked at as criteria against which to measure the proposals that came forward. And as we made the decisions about what we would bring forward to you in this draft, we took full consideration of the following questions. One, how does this item affect our results? You know, in other words, trying to look at the results that we want to achieve as a school system and how this particular various parts of the budget related to the results that we're seeking. A second question that we asked is what learning outcomes are related to this proposal. That you can see as that there's a significant, as is the case in every school district budget, significant portion of the budget, 80%, is attributed to salaries and benefits. And we look at the learning outcomes that are achieved from those salaries. And again, the biggest portion of our salaries, you know, is our teaching staff. The third question is how does this advance practice that is instructionally sound? You will see and hear from our staff today some comments about things we are doing to try and improve instructional practices. The fourth thing is how does this affect our goal of achieving consistency of programming? Over the years, we've made a point of, as we've talked and worked, to try to make sure that we're all trying to provide a set of assured experiences so that if a child is in a fifth grade classroom, that he would or she would receive the same kinds of opportunities and curriculum and experiences as a kid in another fifth grade classroom. And so that assured experience piece, it's not that every classroom is a cookie cutter, but that we can try to, we're committed to trying to make sure that there is consistency across our programming. Another question we asked is which proposals are mission essential as opposed to which are nice to have. So I know the board constantly and continually has asked that question when we've asked for support for funding proposals, or asked it in other community venues. Is this just a nice to have, or is it something that you believe is essential? So we've tried to couch our thinking in that question. And then finally, is what are the consequences for not funding some of the essentials? There are times in budget years where we have cut away at what we believe are essentials, and we've had conversation with the board about what's the impact of cutting something that is an essential component of the program. Finally, I'll turn it over to Ken. We have a lot to go through with you today. I think it would be helpful, and what we're trying to do, if we can, and it's your meeting, but I think that what we'd like to do is to try to get through the presentation, and our hope is that in doing so, it may answer some of the questions that have come forward. But one of the parts of this, we'll go through this, it's not going to be hours and hours, is that we're committed to staying as long as you have questions about this budget. So, because we, as I said, we need to have some sense of where you are and what we may need to do going forward. So thanks again for your time, and let's get going. And we're going to start with Ken Post walking you through parts of the what we call the super graphic. This, by the way, I believe is the first year that we've had a super graphic at this time. It's a document that we've used the past 2 or 3 years. Matt and Matt particularly, and Ken and Chuck have been very involved in putting this together, and we have found it helpful not only for the board's purposes, but for community understanding of our budget. So, Kim, take it away.
Okay. I'm going to walk you through this document, beginning with the proposed staffing changes, which is bottom center. And then after we go through the counterclockwise through this document, Chuck, Ann, and I will go into more detail about the proposals and other variables that are driving any increases here. So in staffing changes, we're reducing 2 classroom teachers due to enrollment decreases at Bella Driscoll. At Cider Mill, Chuck will describe a scheduling change we want to make, programmatic change we want to make, that's actually going to add 1.0 teachers to some specials area and offset that cost by reducing a 5th grade teacher. In Middlebrook, we have a proposal to add 1 math teacher, certified math teacher, and offset the cost of that by reducing 1.5 FTE paraprofessionals. At the high school, the proposal is to add 3 classroom teachers based on the projected enrollment increase. And we're also reducing 0.5 library media specialist and adding 1 FTE library aide. This proposal also is cost neutral, and it increases coverage in the library and provides additional support to students with no extra cost. The special services area, there are a lot of changes, and Ann is going to go into those when we get to her piece a little later on. In the district, 0.5 custodian is being transferred from special services as a driver and will be used, we're going to be outsourcing that operation for some cost savings, and we're going to use that 0.5 FTE custodian as a floater to fill in when people are either on vacation or absent for some reason. We typically use overtime to cover some of those areas now, so that should also result in saving. So when you get the budget detail, you see a decrease in the custodial overtime account. In the district, we also have put in, and I'll describe a little more detail later, 2 FTEs in the security area as recommended by the town security task force. So that's just a summary of all of the staffing changes, and like I said, we'll go into more detail in a little bit on what these are and how they impact the budget. To the left of that chart is the projected class sizes with all of these FTE changes, regular classroom staffing. K through 5, every grade except grade 5 is within the range, and grade 5 is at 22.2. In grades 6 through 12, you can see that about half of the primary subjects' class size averages are above the goal of 22. Above that is the graphic on the salaries, and you can see classroom teachers make up 52% of our total salaries. And if you look at the chart above that, you can see the second section, which is the other certified with administrators and guidance counselors and a lot of other folks. They make up another almost 28% of the salary account, and so you've got roughly 80% of your salary account working directly with children frequently. The classroom teachers' salary increase is based on existing staff with the third year of their contract. So it's existing staff with no salary increases. And same with administrators. The other groups are based on existing staff with estimated increases. And as you can see, those numbers are much smaller dollars. In most cases where you see an increase that's more than 5% in any category, the reason is either due to proposed staffing increases, or as is the case with reading teachers, we hired new staff this year at rates higher than were budgeted, which results in a large budget-to-budget increase. On to employee benefits. Health benefits, as you know, were self-funded, so that cost is largely driven by the claim estimates we get from Ed Norgard. Frequently, as we go through the budgeting process and he gets more and more actual data month by month, it makes for a shorter projection and allows us to sometimes bring that estimate down as it doesn't have to project quite as much inflation. The retirement contribution is another big area, item in that category. It's budgeted to go down a little bit this coming year, and that's based on the actuaries' data that we get. Yeah, that's for classified. For anybody who doesn't know, the board does not contribute to the teacher retirement plan. That's funded by the teachers and the state. So this is for all the other non-certified employees. And in the other employee benefits, which is the bottom line in that category, the increase, while the dollars are not huge, the percentage is large. That's for anticipated increase in severance pay for next year. Moving to the right, building and operations. That category is dominated by the utilities, primarily electric and heating oil, which are budgeted to go down slightly next year. We haven't locked in our heating oil price yet, but we hope to do that sometime in the coming weeks. We have seen in recent years a significant decrease in electric and heating oil usage, and that's factored into this. The other large category in that area is the remodeling and major repairs, which I reviewed with the board 2 weeks ago. We've deferred a couple of items for a year to bring the level down to almost equal to the current year's funding. And those items specifically are the playground equipment at Cider Mill, the gym heaters at Middlebrook, and some additional security cameras at the high school. Below that is the contracted services, outplacements, and other category. The contracted services reflects the upward trend we've seen in independent evaluations, student services, and legal costs, and Ann will talk more about that in her piece in a little bit. Instructional materials are increasing primarily because of an increase in textbook requests, and as you probably know, that's an area that frequently gets targeted when we're making budget reductions, so I believe some of this is trying to get caught up. Staff training is showing an increase, and most of that is in the special education area for special education literacy training. Participation fees show an increase in cost based on the board's budget assumption that the budget this year would not include participation fees, so that the revenue no longer exists. Below that is the budget building blocks, and these are the major budget drivers listed in descending order. If you take the items that are considered contractual in nature or completely unrelated to program changes, and I'll list them all for you. The first three items: salary increases for existing staff, health benefits, an increase in special education tuition, participation fees, staff replacement, cost increase, substitute increase, transportation, special education transportation, property and liability insurance, and then a decrease in utilities and a decrease in the retirement contribution. Those items account for about $3 million, or an increase of 3.93% over our current budget. The remaining items account for a little over $1.1 million increase, or about a 1.5% increase over the current budget. So Dr. Smith will start discussing some of the programmatic changes that'll explain some of these numbers. Ian and I will also have a piece of that. And then after we're done, we'll answer your questions.
Ken, that last statement that you made,
Yes.
Can you get that to us in writing so we can understand?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to go over some of the, basically the story behind the numbers, which is on the back sheet. And I want to go over three major programmatic changes at the building level for next year that will impact staffing and therefore the budget, but we believe will significantly improve our ability to support student learning. And the first one has to do with class size. which primarily impacts the high school, but I do want to mention that this budget does include a reduction in 2 classroom teachers at Miller Driscoll, based upon enrollment projections, but which will maintain class sizes within guidelines for next year. Now, at the high school, there is a projected increase of approximately 60 students next year. And in order to maintain the current student-teacher ratio, we've calculated that we would need to add approximately 4 more teachers to the high school. However, in analyzing the teacher-to-student ratios over the past 10 years, we determined that 3 teachers would create a ratio that approximately equaled the highest historical ratio we've had during that time period. And I kind of want to show you that on this graph here, on this chart. So this chart details the average class size by department for both of those scenarios, 4 teachers versus 3 teachers. The column on the left in the dark green is the current class sizes for this school year, with the ratio at the bottom. Next to that, in the light green, is what we would project the classes would look like next year for 4 teachers. And the column, 2 columns over from that in gold is what it would look like with 3 teachers. We could show the other one. And this is the historical trend in student-teacher ratios over the past 10 years. I've highlighted those 2 years in yellow because those were the highest student-teacher ratios we've had in the past 10 years. 3 additional teachers at the high school would create a ratio that is just slightly under those 2 ratios. Now, you do need to understand that, as we learned in the class size report, there will still be likely some classes at the high school that will be above grade level, above the class size guidelines. But that would be true even for the 4-teacher scenario. Probably slightly more with the 3-teacher scenario than the 4-teacher scenario. It's very hard to predict without hard numbers for student course selection. But we believe that 3 teachers would create a student-teacher ratio that is appropriate and that would work with before.
Do you have copies of those 2 charts?
Yes, I can get them for you. Okay, so that's the high school. Now, the second change is at Millbrook with the addition of a math teacher who will address 2 specific identified needs. And the first has to do with the math performance of our students who are in special education math classes, known as math labs. Our achievement data shows that the students in that program, many of the students in that program, more than we would like to see, are not mastering grade level content. Now, we believe this is happening because the Math in Focus program is quite challenging for them, and it requires the expertise of the content specialist. Now, at the same time, these students have significant learning issues, so they also require the services of the special education teachers. So we believe that by having both of these teachers, each with their own area of expertise, as co-teachers for these classes, we'll be able to ensure that these students are achieving at a level that is appropriate. We also believe that over time, as these students gain proficiency in math, that some of them will be able to move to a less restrictive general education setting with support. Now, the second need that this teacher will address has to do with math interventions. As I mentioned, the Math in Focus program is quite challenging for all students. And we're finding that many of the general ed students, and many of the current middle school students have not had the benefit of the K-5, the complete K-5 elementary experience with Math in Focus. So we're finding that many of them are requiring some intensive remedial instruction in some of the foundational skills that support the higher order conceptual skills required of the middle school math and focus program. So this teacher would provide intensive remedial instruction to students in grades 6 to 8 in small groups on a rotating basis based upon ongoing assessment of student performance. Now, Maria Coleman and her administrative staff believe very strongly that this additional staff is needed to provide adequate support to our students in math. And so they've taken a good hard look at their overall staffing, and they believe that by reorganizing support services, they can reduce classified staff by 1.5 FTE, which would make it a cost-neutral proposal. Now, the third area of change is at Cider Mill, and it's designed to address the programmatic needs similar to the one I just described at Middlebrook. By converting 2 paraprofessional positions into 2 special education teacher positions, and by increasing some special area teachers from part-time to full-time, Dr. Mitchell and her leadership team will be able to create some cohesive house-based instructional teams consisting of general ed teachers, special ed teachers, and reading teachers. This model would be consistent with the model that's already in place at Millbrook, which would make an easier transition for students and parents. But more importantly, these instructional teams will be able to meet the needs of all learners in a much more effective and efficient manner. And it would ensure that all students are being instructed by the most highly qualified teachers. It would also provide Cider Mill with greater flexibility in addressing unanticipated special education needs by creating collaborative time for teachers to plan differentiated instruction and research-based interventions. We also believe it would further reduce the need to pull teachers away from instruction for planning meetings, because we've built that collaborative time in with this model. Now, in an approach similar to Middlebrook, Cider Mill will reduce some of the costs of this increased staffing by reducing 5th grade sections by one full-time equivalent. And that would increase the projected 5th grade class size from 20.7 to 22.2, but would make it consistent with the other grade levels at Cider Mill. The overall incremental cost for this proposal would be approximately $60,000, which represents the salary differential between the 2 paraprofessionals and the 2 special education teachers. Okay, and finally, I would just like to say, although I have been highlighting the programmatic changes that are driving increases to the budget, the building principals have built budgets in collaboration with their leadership teams and central office that include instructional materials, resources, professional learning, and other program improvement efforts that will ensure that our students continue to receive what I think is an outstanding education, but in a very cost-effective, cost-conscious, and responsible way. Thank you. Yeah.
When I put my portion of the budget together, I always look at the increasing needs and the increasing numbers of students for service. And I thought it might be helpful to the board if I shared, quantified what that caseload growth has been. From November 1st, 2012 to August 26, 2013, which was the day we received students, 7 students moved into Wilton with IEPs. That means we needed to implement those IEPs. Another 5 students moved into Wilton during that period who were subsequently found eligible for special education. During that time period, that is after my budget went in and before we opened the door, we had in the district 86 initial referrals for special education eligible for services. We also had 92 initial referrals, students who were found ineligible. So as I've shared with the board in the past, it's always a challenge to program, not knowing who is moving in and joining us, and the referrals and what will be the outcome of the referrals. And of course, as I've shared with you in the past, each referral represents many hours of work on, for many members of the team in terms of evaluation and PPT time. So I thought that might be helpful for you to get some numbers about the increase in students that we serve.
And did you say 92 were ineligible?
Yes. There's another part of that statistic that you might just find interesting, that it splits about half and half, the number of referrals initiated by teachers and the numbers initiated by parents. So that was an interesting piece of information. As I said, as I put the budget together, I tried to anticipate the needs of our students going into the new school year. And when I looked at that, I looked to increase the services of our hearing impaired teacher, who has done a really stellar job in reaching out to that segment of our parent population and their students. We continue to see increasing needs in speech and OT and PT. What I've tried to do is to look at the contract line, those services we've now needed to contract out for and to bring them in-house. It allows us to have those professionals part of our team and supervised by our district. So it's both caseload and to try and offset the contract costs. I've also put on the budget an increase for some school psychologist time. As I said, those evaluations are very labor intensive, and we're finding a need now to have some contract work in psych evaluations to make sure we meet our timely and required deadlines. We continue to see an increase in the number of mediation requests. And again, just to be specific, I thought it might be helpful for the board to hear some hard numbers. So from July 2012 to December 2012, we had 9 mediations. From July 2013 to December 2013, we had 15, which is a 60% increase. So if I project that out for the year, in the school year of 2013, there were 14. Looking at school year 2014, I'm projecting 23 mediations. And of course, with those mediations come typically, so not always, but typically some associated costs. So I have tried to reflect that in my budget as well.
So I'll just walk you through the technology requests. I gave a lengthy report last week, or 2 weeks ago. So I will try and be brief. As you know, our budget is developed by the tech committees and the principals at each building, who then come together with me and kind of balance the school needs with the district priorities. In addition, they're balancing based on our 3-year technology plan that we submit to the state. And those are aligned with the needs of the strategic plan, particularly the curriculum instruction strand of the strategic plan and the communication, the community outreach part of the strategic plan. And as you know, the kind of themes that you'll see going through the technology requests, we're trying to think about how that consistency program, that question that Dr. Richards posed here, are we having assured experiences? Are we providing equipment that will allow that? Are we balancing the technology in a grade level or in a department? Are we providing the equipment that allows teachers to reach these new standards from the Common Core? In addition, our infrastructure needs to be maintained and in some cases upgraded to prepare for the Smarter Balanced Assessment. And also the new teacher evaluation plan is completely done digitally. So we need to make sure that we have both the infrastructure and the equipment to have that be successful. Other elements, you know, we're always concerned about our ability to recover from disaster and our tools that we use to communicate both among each other and with the community. And some of the tools, in addition to giving teachers that ability to deliver this, what we call the 21st century instruction, really also enhance the quality of the classroom, and that would be a budget request for sound fields. And just as a kind of a final statement, really, many of these requests we've trimmed the technology budget over the past 6 years, so a lot of these are requests that you've seen before, so they're not a lot of surprises. They're not projects that you are not aware of. So I'm going to pass it over to Ken, who's going to discuss security.
We put 2 FTEs in our budget request as placeholders for personnel based on the recommendation of the Wilton Security Task Force. The task force has recommended that the town hire an additional school resource officer whose presence would primarily be at Middlebrook. The task force has been discussing recommending that the schools hire an additional person whose responsibilities would include being involved in threat assessments and taking proactive measures to promote a positive school community. The task force is still working on a job description for this individual and has not yet officially made this recommendation. Since funding these positions has not been discussed anywhere, we wanted to make it part of our proposal just to make sure that it's on the record and it moves forward during the budget process until the final recommendation is made and final funding sources are determined, if that's desirable. On the right-hand side of this page, the story behind the numbers, you can see the pie chart that breaks out the increase. 55% of the increase is being generated by the non-special ed and non-security requests. The security request generates about 4% of the increase, and special education generates about 41% of the increase. To the right of that is just a graphic representation of the building blocks that we walked through earlier. And you can see that the 3 big blocks on the bottom are the special education tuition, the health benefits, and the salary increases for existing staffing. The other page we gave you breaks out those building blocks the same way that pie chart is broken out, with the budget without special education and security, just special education, and just security. And with that, we'll take whatever questions you have.
We'll go around the horn here, but so you're telling me the security that we have in listed over on this document is still not in the security number.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Those are, the things in the facilities budget are things that we were budgeting for already based on, not on a task force recommendation, but based on the security assessments that were done by the police department.
For Glenn and Chris, this obviously is the first pass that we have here. We don't have a budget book. Nothing is cast in stone at this point. There are no questions that are off the table. You can ask anything that you want. It's an opportunity for us to provide the district with some of our impressions on what we think is happening within the district and within the town, and ask any sort of questions relative to that we'd like to. As Dr. Richards mentioned, we do try to stay at a policy level, so we try not to be down into the weeds, but invariably, we have to at some level because these are big numbers, and we need to understand the detail behind them. So that, anybody want to go first? Any specific questions?
I have one. Yeah.
Sure.
Just, Ken, one quick question, and it's just a technical one. In last year's building and operations budget, you included property and liability insurance for a budget of $2,590,000. When I look at this year's proposal, property and liability, which is almost $270,000, is not in that proposal. Where did property and liability go? Because it's a big number, and if you take it out of last year's, then the increase we're looking at is pretty significant. Maybe it was just the omission, it should have been in there, I can't tell.
Good question.
I haven't added those numbers, so I think it probably should have been in there, but it's just not. Pardon?
What heading?
On the building and operations this year versus building and operations last
Right,
year.
gotcha. Okay.
Last year included $265,000 of property and liability. This year, there's nothing there. It may just be an omission.
Yeah, I think it's just an omission.
Okay.
Because I have it in the building blocks,
It's in the building blocks, yeah, the 26,000.
but I don't have it in the security.
It doesn't show in the schedule or on the top. I think it may just be an omission that needs to be put in.
I believe so.
Math in focus, I interpret that to be Common Core.
I'm sorry.
Math in focus
Is aligned to the Common Core.
is Common Core. Okay.
The math program.
With the math program, that's what we call it. So, okay.
That's the name of the program that we
Yeah.
bought. It's a Singapore type.
And in your mediations for this year, you had budgeted 64, or budgeted 24, which was a 60% increase over last year. How are we running at that rate at this point?
Yes, that was based on comparing July 2012, show you how I ran those numbers.
So we would
I tried
expect to be,
I compared July 2012 to December 2012 and took July 2013 to December 2013 to use that so I could do apples to apples. Based on that, I'm anticipating a 60% increase for the school year in mediations.
so we'll hit the 24 that you planned.
Yeah, that's actually consistent with other districts that are running increased numbers.
With your peers, you've talked to them and got the same kind of feedback?
Yes, actually, there has been some email communications amongst the directors about concerns about the number of mediations, and I have no responses. It's running high, at least in this DERB.
And in the technology area, the only thing I can see in your proposal that relates specifically to technology is increase in technology purchases, but I can't find any technology number anywhere in any of these pie charts or, so I don't know what we're spending on technology, I don't know what the budget is.
Okay, the total budget is, and that includes salaries too of personnel. So the total budget is $2,080,942. In terms of the kind of development part of the project, the projects that would be either replacement or new, That is 616,153. And then the bottom half, when you get the budget book, you'll see is infrastructure and salaries of the staff and maintenance contracts and things like that. So that, in terms of an increase of those projects, is about $33,000 increase over last year of the purchasing part.
How much of that 616,000 is contractual lease obligations?
Well, again, the only one I would sort of consider on the contractual side of those would be the computer upgrade. I mean, we can always choose not to upgrade our computers, but that would be the refurbishing the computers that are going to no longer be under warranty. So if we went off our computer cycle, that would take off a big chunk of that. However, we'd be living with computers that when they break are difficult or just throwaways.
You say a big chunk.
200,000, 214,759 is not the exact number.
Thanks.
And there are a couple of new things in that. The district food service needs to replace some of their computers, which are well past the aged part. It's not a big number, but there are some additions to that we typically don't always do every year.
Matt, the SBAC testing and the teacher evaluation, which are both going to be done digitally, that is resulting in an increased number of computer requests?
Well, there's a couple of things. One, they're framing around making sure that each teacher has the same equipment so they can deliver the same content and prepare kids for the exam. In terms of the exam itself, down at the bottom half, we're increasing some of our bandwidth and some of our equipment to increase the bandwidth so that when we get into the heavy testing window and all those kids are online, we don't have to worry about kids getting kicked off.
But as far as, I know we've talked about this before, but just make sure.
Well,
I'm clear.
and there is a request, and I mentioned this in my presentation,
Right.
for Chromebook laptop
Right.
cards, and that's so that we have more equipment to deliver instruction during the year, and also during the testing, we're not shutting all of our computers down because we have labs that'll be running all day during the testing window.
So a lot of this is being driven by the mandate that we
Yes.
switch to the test back
Yep.
and implement the state teacher.
As we go forward, as I had alluded previously, I'll be interested in looking at each of these areas and understanding how we look back at what we spent in 2013-14 and what we're proposing to spend in 2014-15 and why there needs to be an adjustment. Using technology just as an example, we spent $2 million this year. If we spend the same amount next year, some of the funds that we spent last year were in acquiring equipment that doesn't need to be acquired again in the coming year. The initial build out of wireless at Middlebrook is an example. So in theory, those resources can be spent in other build outs. I'll be looking to understand why an increase in those areas really is necessary, as opposed to staying at the same funding level. And that's not a cut. That's the same funding level. We had a reasonably good school year this year, 2013-14. This is a big number at 5.42%. It's a number I don't see how the town can afford. So we're going to have to, and I'm just one person, I'm not speaking for the board by any means. I think we're going to have to ask ourselves those questions. How can we look at our budget from the perspective of freezing everything other than contractual obligations and get what we need to get done. That's my sense on what you presented, you know, I'm always amazed with the amount of work that goes into doing this, and please know how appreciative I am of that, because I greatly do it. And looking at the personnel changes, Mrs. Coleman, my hat's off to you for the work that you've done in Middlebrook to try to borrow from one program and move to another so that it's a cost-neutral proposal. I think that's fantastic. And just from my own experience inside Middlebrook, I can see where it's needed. So I think that's wonderful. I think we're going to have to potentially look at more of that. Those are my initial questions so far. Chris, you have any top of mind?
So when was the last time the group went through the exercise of trying to justify the budget from the ground up as opposed to just reconciling one year's spending to the next year's proposed spending? And if I could get those materials for, you know, my background reading, that would be useful.
Can you clarify what you're...
Sure, so as best as I understand, and I'm trying to absorb the material that I just received, we have a pretty good understanding of what we expect to spend this school year, and then the analyses attempt to reconcile expected spending in the current school year to the next school year, and their, you know, rationale, justification for it. But I want to know when last time we went through an exercise of trying to make a determination of what we ought to spend, sort of on a ground-up basis, without necessarily a reference to what we spent last year. So that's the general question.
Okay.
And then the second is there an ability in the planning process to have an understanding, not so much what we expect to spend necessarily next year, but the year after that and the year after that, what kind of longer range, what capabilities we have to do some longer range planning I would find useful as well.
Well, I'll address that first. The Board of Finance, at least in recent years, has asked us to do a 3-year plan, where we obviously have to make certain assumptions. It gets a little tricky, especially if I was to do one beyond 14-15 now, because as you saw, the biggest piece of our budget is the teachers' salaries, and 14-15 is the last year of the contract. So it would really be and it's such a large dollar amount, it's kind of a wild guess as to what salary increases we would put in for that. So it would really, I don't know how much value it would have, but it's certainly an exercise we can go through for you. As far as your first point about building the budget from the ground up, I think we really do go through that process. And again, I'll take the salaries to be the biggest piece of it. When we put the salary budget together, we are going through every single individual that we currently have on staff and seeing, especially for the teachers, what degree level they have, what step level they're on in the contract. If there is a step advancement in the next year's contract, we place them there and we assign that salary to them for next year's budget. And we do that for all of our individuals. Our health benefit costs are based on a rolling average of our actual costs. It has nothing to do with what we budgeted before. It's the actual cost that we build that up to. When we ask the principals and directors to give us a budget for things like supplies and equipment, Matt goes through very specifically with his equipment for technology. With supplies, they're going through, sometimes as specific as, 12 dozen pencils at this price and that kind of thing. So we really do, we don't just roll it over from year to year. They do go through the exercise of saying we need this many of this at this price in most cases. For things like our property and liability insurance, I go back to the broker and ask him for a recommendation. For the retirement plan, we get the actual actuary's report. So I think we're doing the textbooks again. Also, they know specifically what book they want to buy, how many, and how much they're going to cost. Now you can debate whether you think certain things should be in there, but nobody is just picking a number out of the air and placing it in based on the prior year's budget. They really do go through that thoughtful exercise. And I think after we make whatever adjustments you want us to make after today's session, you'll be getting a detailed budget book. And when you get that, I think you'll see a lot of fluctuations within the department. The math department at the high school might spend $50,000 on textbooks this year and $10,000 the following year because they just get what they believe they need at that time. I hope that
information
does that help address your question?
It does. Let me see if I can get to it in a slightly different way. Let's presume a base spending level. pick whatever the proposed budget is. If I were to ask, how difficult would it be if I said, presume it goes up by 5% or down by 5%, to get some sense as to how outcomes would change, how the quality of education would change? Would that be possible to do?
We have done.
Arbitrary, I just.
Yeah, we've
got
done, in past years, we've gone through scenario building to do just that. And that's certainly something that's going to be done, and I think is helpful. As I said earlier, is that if we do make some reductions, part of that scenario building is, here's the impact on the operations, the services, the programs, big parts of the budget. So, yeah, we can do that.
So not just how the services might be compromised if we spent less money, but how outcomes might be improved if we spent more.
I don't have the number right in front of me. I don't know if one of you do. How many students do we have this year? 2013, 14? 4,000?
42.
42, 330, I don't know.
A little over 4,200, 4,250.
And the number for
I don't have
next
my
year is
enrollment.
essentially, is it flat?
Yes, the LMS has a flat.
Okay.
Yes, current is 4224, projection for next year is 4224.
Okay. Yeah, I seem to
So,
recall that.
whereas last year we had some exciting new projects, we had new courses, we had STEM, this is basically just maintaining what we have.
Well,
We will
are
be-
making some changes programmatically, but we've tried to make sure that those programmatic changes are not driving significant increases
Right.
to the budget.
And am I correct that the programmatic changes are pretty much special ed driven?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Going
special
forward.
ed, special ed with all learners. We're trying to move towards a more integrated model of special ed and general ed. And by creating these collaborative teams at both Millbrook and Cider Mill, it will have a significant impact upon our special ed services, but it will also have an impact upon all learners.
I think one of the things that Ann reminds us of a great deal is that this is by law and by practice, that most of our youngsters who are receiving special services spend most of their day in mainstream classes, the exception being the kids who have the most significant disabilities.
And Ian, I assume that some of the innovations you made this year, bringing some of the services in-house, have actually helped to limit your increase for next year.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
think we've seen
It would be worse.
wonderful payoff in the training we were able to provide for some of our special ed teachers in reading, specialized reading. We've seen a wonderful payoff for students.
Sure. Ken, I guess, I want to make sure I phrase this properly. We are, your proposal and your presentation ties everything back to last year's budget. We're halfway through the year now, and I would think that there should be some reasonable ability to forecast what the actuals are going to be for this year. Meaning that there may be some areas where we're going to will exceed last year's budget presentation for whatever reason, and there are going to be some areas where we hopefully will come in well under last year's budget. How can we get a handle on what's happening there? I'm always troubled budget to budget, as opposed to budget to what we actually did. And I'd like to see some effort made to figure out where we're going to end the year in these same categories and the same breakouts that you presented, so we can get a better handle on what are the real deltas next year's budget over this year's actuals. It is a truer picture of what we're actually doing than budget to budget. And I'm not sure how we get there and how, clearly, it's a 6-month looking forward forecast, but we should have some run rates now that we can extrapolate out for the full year and know how we're doing to these categories versus the budget versus what we're proposing for next year.
To some degree, that's accurate, and I do that in my monthly financial reports. I'm projecting out to the end of the year. Certain things, utilities are tricky because we've just begun the winter season. Salaries we can kind of get a handle on, although I don't know from now through the end of the year how many unpaid leaves of absences we might have, or if anybody's going to retire in the middle of the year. So, but you're right. To some degree we can do that. I'd also state that I think whichever comparison you want to make, I think there are deficiencies in either one, because the 13-14 budget doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the 14-15 budget for certain areas. For example, if there was a sudden spike in heating oil costs, what we spent, or suddenly have a colder or warmer winter, what we spent one year or what we budgeted one year may not be any indicator at all of what we're going to spend the following year. So in that case, they may or may not, either one can have faults, but we can certainly do that.
I could see where we could address your concerns with footnotes. In one of the great areas, you mentioned heating oil, the other one special services and outplacements. Right now we're running $600,000 over budget in that area.
Right.
That's a pretty good example. It's a question that has come to us from the town more than once. It would be exciting to try to find a way to show that we hear them and are trying to be responsive. I recognize there's a challenge in that, but it would be nice to see if we can do that. What other guidance and questions do we have?
Do we have to, how is the Affordable Care Act affecting our health plan, if at all?
The only effect so far is a tax that's placed on employers. We're not actually subject to all of the taxes and fees because we're self-funded, but there is one that ends up costing us about $100,000 per year. That's it so far.
And that's in the forecast.
All
It
right.
actually started this year.
I'm not sure we've given you any specific consensus-driven ideas. Do we want to try to do that?
We never had participation fees last year.
The previous board, in their last recommendation to the administration in preparing their initial thinking, was please prepare the initial budget thinking without participation fees so that we can see what it will look like. We had communicated to the town that we had to use participation fees, but we weren't fans of it. So it's being built without them right now. It may be something that we have to continue.
Okay.
That was a long-winded answer, I apologize.
Yeah, but that helps me thinking.
I think what I'm hearing from the table is an interest in trying to do budget versus actual. I think we're hearing, looking for more and more information on understanding how the budget was built from the ground up. I know I referenced, I think that this past year was fairly well, and I'd like to see what it would look like if everything were held flat, with the exception of our contractual obligations. Chris, your thoughts?
I would agree with that, yeah. As I said, you're basically maintaining here, but it's a 5% increase. I'd like to see different scenarios at different price points.
Sure.
Since so much of our budget is driven by salaries and compensation, our teachers make up the biggest portion of it. Recall at the orientation that we had, it has been a long time since we really looked hard at average class size recommendations. And I have to think, with all the technology that we've invested in over those years, just think like a year since we've gone back, we're still, these numbers here that you're presenting were 7 to 8 years ago, maybe longer, since they were last reviewed and put forward, that we've got to be getting some benefit, or we should be expecting to get some benefit from the technology that we've invested all this money in terms of being able perhaps to accommodate one more student per class. Doesn't seem unreasonable. Or maybe even two, with the benefits of technology. And we've spent a lot of money over the years in technology. And I'm just posing the question, are we at a point in time where we really need to go back now and take a hard look at our class size recommendations?
I would totally agree that it's time to relook at it.
Okay.
The research shows that class size does not have a significant impact on student achievement. But it is of value here in this community, and if we're going to make some changes in that, we need to do some work in terms of educating the community about that. I'm not so sure that I'm comfortable with the idea that technology will replace people.
No, I think efficiency, improve efficiency.
I
is what
do
I'm-
think the technology
I would
does
hope.
increase efficiency, but in terms of how we do our work rather than replacing staff. That said, I come from a district where we gradually increase class sizes as the kids get older, and I have to say, kids did fine with that. So I'd be more than willing, if you wanted to look at that.
It's a big driver of our budget.
Yes.
Big driver.
My only caution is that is an important value in this community, small class sizes. And so we have some work to do in terms of turning that around.
Yeah, I think
think you're-
additionally, this community places a high value on highly proficient teaching and small class
Well,
sizes, and the two go hand in hand.
Well, I think what I've learned and seen in my time on the board is small class sizes at the lower grades is essential. You know, we're building these budding learners and readers. And the stronger readers we develop at the lower grades, the more efficient the entire process and system builds. And we are seeing larger class sizes in the high school. We are receiving from time to time letters of concern from parents with class sizes in the high school being large. I know we're pushing the upper limits in some of the science classes, but I agree. I'm sorry?
No, it's not language.
And some of the language classes as well, but I also agree that it's not something just like participation fees, it's not something we can't look at. Other thoughts, comments? Again, we know how much work goes into this. We greatly appreciate it. I wish we had a limitless pot of gold. I really, really do, because I know the work that each of you puts into what you do every day is immeasurable and so greatly appreciated. I wish I had a better starting point perspective for you, but all I can say at this point is thank you. If there aren't any other questions, comments, thoughts?
Thank you. I would just remind the administrators, we were going to meet in my office afterwards. We're going to start losing people after tomorrow. So we have some assignments to talk about and some work to do. But again, we appreciate your time, and we'll go back to work.
I need a motion to adjourn. Move. Second? All in favor? What was your question?
You get it, but it was the list, and it's a budget.
Hey Gary, our next step is getting the budget book, is that correct? Or do we have another work group like this for?
No, you'll get the budget book before the next workshop.
Okay, so we'll get the budget book towards the end of the calendar year, correct?
No.
How is the first week?
Once you stack them,
Where's this year?
they can even go to my office if they want.
The meeting is,
You guys have a big turnout, in the audience? No.
Well, we didn't get our work done, you know, we had to get the audit report.
It was actually nice for me, because it was real quiet in my office. Most of my department. No, I can't print it from here, I'm gonna go to my office and print it. You just tell them to print it in my office.
We got,
Thank you very much.
our audit has to be done.
Thank you, Mom.
how's Papa doing? Good? Very well.
That is the greatest picture of inside your chair. I can't get over that.
Good one, how are you, Chris?
Future, that's right there.
Keep it.
Were you on my earbuds?